Hi, ladies. Welcome back to another episode of Kenya Knows. My name is Kenya Winston, and we have made it to episode 16, which is really exciting. I have been having so much fun making this content for you, and I cannot wait until football season starts so I can do more game recaps, some live streams, and so much more. 6 months without football is really boring, even though there's obviously the NBA playoffs and even March Madness and the NCAA men's basketball playoffs. But even that doesn't, take over all the excitement that I get from watching football. I love football, especially college football, and I realize I haven't talked enough college football on my channel, so that is what I'm going to do today. Because the college football season does kick off in August, and we're pretty much almost there. Like, it's literally July. So we're getting closer to August as the days go by. And I really, really wanted to talk about some team predictions, some win-loss records, and much more. So for today's video, I'm going to be predicting the SEC teams' win-loss records. The SEC isn't as top-heavy as it used to be. Like, remember those days when Alabama and Florida were pretty much just running the SEC for like 2 decades? And now there are like multiple teams that could compete for an SEC championship every single year. So there is a lot more parity in the SEC now. And I have to be honest with you, I love it this way because I hate it when the SEC was as predictable as it was. It was pretty much Alabama, Florida here and there, Auburn, Georgia twice, but it was mostly Alabama. I actually predict that there are going to be at least 11 SEC teams with a winning record. Some of these teams like Tennessee and Florida, they'll have winning records, but it'll be in that like 7-5, 6-6 range. So they won't make the playoffs, but they'll still have winning records. I am going to break down each team's schedule and rank their strength of schedule compared to the rest of the SEC, who they will beat and who they will lose to. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Let's get into team breakdowns. Let's start with Texas. Texas has one of the best rosters, not only in the SEC, but in college football. They struggled last year with the offensive line play, the quarterback play, the secondary play, and much more. A team that on paper should have been in the playoffs ended up missing it because of a 9-3 record and because they lost games that they should have won. Arch Manning did not have a breakout season that any of us hoped for. However, he did play about 4 to 5 games of elite play to where you can say that there is only more room for improvement, and it's only going to go up from here. He can't get any worse. Texas starts the season with 3 straight home games: Texas State, Ohio State, and UTSA. Now, they should start with a 3-0 record. They should easily beat Texas State and UTSA. The hardest matchup is obviously going to be a home game against Ohio State. Now, considering that this is a home game, this should go in Texas's favor. And the difference between these two teams is the quarterback play. Whereas Julian Sand, to me, is very robotic and doesn't have a lot of upside, Arch Manning has the better arm, the better pocket presence, the better mobility, and is a lot more athletic. And he's a really good runner as well. That is going to be the reason why Texas wins that game. I think Arch Manning will prove himself against Ohio State and will play a lot better against them this time than he did the last time they played. Now, other games that they should win would be the away game at Tennessee. Now, Tennessee is obviously one of those stadiums that's very hard to play, but Texas has the better roster right now. They also should beat the Gators, Mississippi State, Missouri, and Arkansas. Now, the other difficult matchups will obviously be against Oklahoma, Florida, Ole Miss, LSU, and Texas A&M. But the only game out of that stretch that I have them losing to is against LSU. And it's not because I don't think Texas can beat them. It's only because I don't see them going 12-0. I think they will lose one of those big games. So I just chose LSU as that game that they will lose. Now, they do have some trap games on their schedule, and I think that's going to be obviously Oklahoma, because that's always a trap game, and Florida. Those are the games that they could lose. I have them winning those games, but they could lose those games. All in all, I have Texas finishing with an 11-1 record. LSU has the second hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. This is going to be a whole new LSU team, coaching staff, identity, and culture, with Lane Kiffin as their head coach. Lane Kiffin is probably the one coach that is under the most pressure because of the way he left Ole Miss. That did not go over so well in the sports media world, and it also didn't go over so well with the Ole Miss team and the Ole Miss fans, who, by the way, are preying on his downfall. The games that LSU should win will be against LA Tech, McNeese, Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. Their toughest matchups are going to be against Clemson, who they opened the season against again. They did open the season against them last year as well. Other tough matchups include Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Auburn, Alabama, Texas, and Tennessee. This is why they have the second hardest strength of schedule in the SEC, because they play at Auburn, Alabama, Texas, and Tennessee 4 weeks straight. Two of them are away games, and two of them will be home games. And when you add in the fact that they open the season against Clemson, and then they play back-to-back away games against Texas A&M and Ole Miss, that is tough. That is a tough stretch of games to play, but I still have them finishing with an 11-1 record. Mississippi State has the third hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. Now, I don't know much about this roster as a whole, but what I do know is the way that they played last year. I am not expecting this huge leap from them. Like, yes, they went band for band with teams like Texas and Ole Miss, and I want to say Florida, and almost won those games, but their downfall was their defense. Now, I only have Mississippi State winning about 3 games this season. They will lose games against South Carolina, Missouri, Alabama, LSU, Oklahoma, Texas, Vandy, Auburn, and Ole Miss. But the fact that they have to play Alabama, LSU, Oklahoma, Texas, Vandy, Auburn, and back-to-back games, that is why they have the third hardest schedule in the SEC. I have Mississippi State finishing the season with a 3-9 record. Oklahoma has the fourth strength of schedule in the SEC. Oklahoma, to everybody's surprise, made the playoffs last season. A lot of it had to do with their quarterback, John Mateer, who played a really great first half of the season until a hand injury against Auburn. Their defense really stepped up in the back half of the season, even though I think they're pretty consistent throughout the entire season. But they basically had to carry them to a postseason first round matchup that they eventually lost to Alabama. I think Oklahoma will regress just a little bit, but they will still have a very good team. Brent Venables has to make the playoffs again this year if he wants to keep his job. I can argue that he overachieved last season, and I think he did a great job with his defense. I actually don't think that it was his fault that his quarterback was injured and that his offense just fell off a cliff when that happened. I mean, the hand injury, it is only so much a quarterback can do when he can't really grip the ball in the way that he was in the first half of the season. Now, the games that they should win will be against UTEP, New Mexico, Kentucky, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Missouri. Their trap game will be against Michigan and Florida. Michigan played them pretty tough last year. I don't think people realize how close that game was up until the end of the fourth quarter. But the reason why Michigan lost that game was because they didn't have the offense. Now, their toughest matchups are obviously going to be against Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. I have them losing to Georgia and Texas A&M. I don't know. I do have Oklahoma finishing the season with a 9-3 record. Auburn has the fifth hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. Auburn had one of the worst quarterbacks last season, but had one of the best offensive lines. Their biggest issue was their defense was sometimes inconsistent and a little bit undisciplined, but they also have a new head coach, a new quarterback, and tons of new players on their team. I have them being one of the surprise teams this season because I don't think they're all that bad. Now, I don't know what I can say is that I always expect them to have a pretty decent defense to where they will always be competitive in games. But the games that they should win will be against Southern Miss, Samford, Arkansas, and Mississippi State. They do have a few trap games on their schedule, such as Florida, Vanderbilt, and Tennessee. However, I do feel like they will win one of those games. Their hardest matchup will be against Georgia, LSU, Ole Miss, and Alabama. And what makes their schedule so difficult is the fact that they have to play a stretch of games for 6 straight weeks against top SEC opponents, all who will be competing for playoff spots. So I do have Auburn finishing the season with an 8-4 record. Tennessee has the sixth hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. While they don't necessarily have a very tough stretch of games, they play a lot of top teams. Tennessee was a very interesting team these last 2 years. Losing one of their top quarterbacks because of money and contracts was a big storyline before and after the playoffs in 2024. Then they get a transfer quarterback in Joey Aguilar, who played very decent during the season. But the Tennessee defense really fell off a cliff from the top 5 unit that they were the previous year. The defense could not stop any offense, which led to Tennessee losing a lot of games down the stretch, especially the game against Georgia, where they were up by halftime and then they choked the game in the second half. The games they should win will be against Furman, Kennesaw State, Arkansas, and Kentucky. The trap games will definitely be against Vanderbilt, but I do have Tennessee losing to Texas, Auburn, Alabama, Texas A&M, LSU, and Vanderbilt. I have Tennessee ending this season with a 6-6 record. Ole Miss has the seventh hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. Getting Trinidad Chambliss as their starting quarterback is the best thing that could have happened for Ole Miss. Trinidad Chambliss had one of the best playoff games in the modern college football playoff era when he played against Georgia. And he is my front runner to win the Heisman because of what he brings to the table in terms of the playing off structure, the playmaking, the athleticism, and his ability to extend the play. However, they did lose a lot on defense, and they have a new coach in Pete Golding, who rubbed a few coaches such as Steve Sarkisian the wrong way during the offseason. However, he is going to have to prove that he can repeat the excellent coaching that he did in the playoffs again during the regular season. The teams that Ole Miss should be are Louisville, Charlotte, and Wofford. There are a few trap games on the schedule, like obviously Florida and Oklahoma. I have both as trap games. I have them winning both of those, but I do think these are the teams that can give them a run for their money. I also have them beating Vanderbilt, Missouri, Auburn, and Mississippi State. The only teams I have them losing to will be Texas, LSU, and Georgia. All those teams right now have more proven head coaches and quarterbacks that are talented enough to be able to go back and forth with Trinidad if a shootout starts to happen. So I have Ole Miss finishing the season with a 9-3 record. South Carolina has the eighth hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. There is nothing about this team that I am confident in with the exception of two players. I am a tiny bit confident in Lenore Sellers. I hope he improves. I don't think he'll improve that much, but I really hope he improves because he has all the tools. He has the athleticism. He does have a pretty decent arm, but he just has not been able to put it together, and I think a lot of that has to do with coaching. But the best player on the South Carolina team is Dylan Stewart, their standout defensive end. Other than that, I am not that high on this roster. Their offensive line was injured during the spring practice, and that offensive line was one of the worst in football last year. And the fact that their transfer offensive linemen are already injured, that is not good. And I also think that Shane Beamer is one of the most overrated head coaches in the SEC. As the 2024 season was probably one of their better seasons, and they lost games due to bad calls from refs, they were not able to sustain that success and eventually fell off a cliff in 2025. So I am not really going to spend that much time talking about South Carolina's schedule, as I really only have them winning 6 games, which is the best case scenario for this team. They play a tough schedule. They are going to lose to Alabama, Florida, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Georgia, and Clemson. But I actually have them beating Tennessee, funny enough. The teams that they should beat will obviously beat Kent State and Towson, but other than that, they finished with a 6-6 record. Florida has the ninth hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. This could be the SEC's breakout team of the year if everything falls into place. The team I feel had really good rosters these last 2 seasons, but they were also playing these top 5 strength of schedules in the SEC. They were very undisciplined. The quarterback was either injured or inconsistent, and the head coach never had the team prepared. However, this team has a new head coach, a new quarterback, and some potential talent on the roster. Obviously, the Gators should beat Florida Atlantic, Campbell, Florida State, unfortunately. However, I do have them losing to Auburn, Ole Miss, Texas, Georgia, and Oklahoma. I do think that they will beat Missouri, South Carolina, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. What's funny is that I don't necessarily have a trap game in mind because of all the teams that they played. They can beat Georgia, they can beat Oklahoma. I guess they can beat Ole Miss. For some reason, I just feel confident that they could compete with these teams and possibly or upset one of them. But I do have them finishing this season with a 7-5 record. Arkansas has the 10th hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. Arkansas will only win about 2 games this season against Tulsa and North Alabama. But other than that, they lose to every team on their schedule. Sorry, not sorry. This team has been garbage for years, and I don't see them making a huge leap this upcoming season. I have them finishing the season with a 2-10 record. Kentucky has the 11th hardest schedule in the SEC. Kentucky is they're basically on the same tier as Arkansas and Mississippi State, as they do not have the rosters to compete with other teams in the SEC as of right now. However, for some reason, Kentucky is like the Iowa of the SEC. They always end up beating somebody that they shouldn't. But I only have them winning 2 games this season. They will beat Youngstown and South Alabama. However, they will lose to pretty much every other team on their schedule. I have them finishing the season with a 2-10 record. Texas A&M has the 12th hardest schedule in the SEC. This is a team that won 11 total games last season and was one of the most dominant defenses and offenses in the entirety of the SEC. However, they ended up falling short in the playoffs in round one against Miami due to the poor quarterback play of Marcel Reed. Marcel Reed struggled against zone coverages a lot last season. And another issue was the fact that he wasn't totally locked in when it came to his playoff game, as a video surfaced of him at a party the night before. However, I feel like this team is always going to have dominant players on both sides of the ball, as well as great coaching. I had them clearly beating Rice and Missouri State. I also had them beating Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Arizona State. However, they will lose to LSU and Texas. Texas beat them last season, and they basically beat them because of the poor play by Marcel Reed again. And I think that Texas right now just has the more dominant roster and should pull that game off. I also have them getting upset by LSU. Even though Texas A&M pretty much ran through LSU last season, that LSU team was not very good and they were not coached very well, and there were tons of injuries to the quarterback and the offensive line. I think that Texas A&M will lose to LSU by a touchdown. But I do have Texas A&M finishing the season with a 10-2 record. Vanderbilt has the 13th hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. Vanderbilt has been a surprise team these last 2 seasons, finishing with winning records and with upset wins, one against Alabama and one against Tennessee. They also were able to steal one of the top quarterbacks who had committed to Georgia. Vanderbilt is slowly becoming a very competitive powerhouse football school, and that is scary. I have them clearly beating Austin Peay, Delaware, North Carolina State, and Kentucky. However, because of the uncertainty of at quarterback, because we have yet to see their new quarterback play college football, they will lose to Auburn, Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, and Florida. However, I do have them beating Tennessee. Vanderbilt will end up regressing this season just a little bit, and it won't be because they're not talented. I just think that other teams have gotten better. So I have Vanderbilt finishing the season with a 7-5 record. Alabama has the 14th hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. Regardless of what Alabama fans may think, Alabama was not not a good overall team last season, and they haven't been this dominant in the last few seasons either. I think Ty Simpson was a really good quarterback and a step up from Jalen Milroe. Until he was injured, the first 7 games, he was really good. I want to say he had like a 27-5 touchdown to interception ratio. It was something like that. but the back half of the season is where things really got bad, like really bad, because Ty was injured. They had zero run game, and their offensive line was really bad, especially in the back half of the season. I also think their number one wide receiver in Ryan Williams, who was supposed to be their superstar, completely fell off the cliff last season and was basically ran out of the offense. I mean, he did not do pretty much anything in that offense. He made no impact. However, I do think that Kalen DeBoer is a really good coach. I think it was just going to take some time for him to really implement his style of coaching and culture at Alabama. Alabama should be ECU, Kentucky, and Chattanooga. I also have them beating Kentucky, Florida State, South Carolina, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Vanderbilt, and Auburn. Obviously, the biggest trap game on the schedule, and it will always be, is against Auburn, because Auburn always plays them tough, and the last 2 seasons they have played them tough. Their toughest matchups will be against Georgia and LSU, who will have them losing to. I do think Georgia and LSU have better rosters and better head coaches as of right now, so I have Alabama finishing this season with a 10-2 record. And finally, God, this is a long video. Georgia has the 15th hardest strength of schedule in the SEC. Georgia is always going to be the team that I don't always see having a major regression. Even if they lose players to the NFL, because Kirby Smart is one of the best head coaches in the entirety of the SEC, if not the entirety of college football. Georgia's only issue is that they don't have the depth that they used to have. Alabama doesn't have that either. LSU doesn't have that either. And it's impacted those teams specifically a lot more than it has other teams. However, I am confident in Kirby Smart's coaching to where even without the depth, their secondary players will still be consistent and they will still be solid. They should be WKU and Tennessee State. In all honesty, Georgia is the only team in the SEC where I have them going undefeated, which shocks me, to be honest with you. I think that they will beat every single team that they play. And I know that that is hard to say, considering it's actually a lot tougher to go undefeated in the era of college football that we are in, because of the balance that the NIL and transfer portal has offered these other teams. But I just think because Georgia has the easiest schedule in the SEC, and they don't play these stretches of tough games like other teams in their conference do play, that's going to make it a lot easier for them to be able to just stonewall all these teams and possibly go undefeated. The trap games on their schedule will be Auburn, Florida, and Oklahoma. But like I said, Kirby Smart is a better coach than all 3 of those coaches. I just think he'll have his team ready and prepared. I have Georgia finishing this season with a 12-0 record. All right, ladies, that concludes the SEC win-loss records and strength of schedule rankings. I think the SEC will be one of the most competitive conferences this season. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. What are your predictions and what are your hot takes? Let me know in the comment section, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and share this video with your girlfriends. I will see you in the next one. Bye! Adrenaline.